Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Exercise Mechanic Podcast. I am Etienne Asselin and I'm joined by the wonderful Lion Taylor. I mean, he looks like a lion right now. Ryan Taylor and Brett Patterson. Gentlemen, how are you guys doing today?
Rawr.
Good man, how are you?
I'm awesome. Fuck, that's funny. Recording a podcast at the end of a long day where you've been speaking the whole day means that you are absolutely going to be slurring your words, so bear with me. Like we were talking about kind of a little bit before launching recording was potentially starting today with talking about like some client wins and some things that have stood out over the last little while in your own professional lives, like because the exercise mechanic is but a piece of what you guys do. There's a lot more to you than that. And so what's something that perhaps stands out as a client win or something you maybe would like to underscore today as we get the ball rolling? So whoever wants to go first, what do you think?
Totally. So I started a new role at a training facility in Ottawa called Titan Performance. They mainly train teams, but they've started rolling out PT in the last year, personal training and group training. So I am the PT lead now. And so just having that kind of level of influence and rolling out a lot of kind of infrastructure that they don't have in place yet has been really exciting. And like, I never thought I'd be excited about marketing. Like, it's not my wheelhouse. I never really loved sales. But because I'm kind of like, not at the top, but at least like influencing other trainers, like I don't know, something's just like got me fired up about it. So I've been like working nights and like just like getting really into it and diving my head into it, and it's fun to just kind of like take on a new task and a new role like this.
I like that. Is it is it, when it comes to the marketing side of things, does it have anything to do with like choosing or like influencing the direction of the company? Like, do you feel like you have a say on, I guess, the arc of the company, or are you just kind of like figuring out the marketing plan that someone's telling you to do? Or
definitely more of the A, which is really cool. I've been given
Nice.
a long leash, and the management and ownership seem to trust me.
Nice.
Even though I don't have a marketing background, I have worked in a lot of different gyms and facilities, and I have got a reasonably good sales background for someone who has never done any formal education in it. So yeah, it feels like I've been given a lot of kind of leeway, although the budget isn't big for it. My ability to work within what we've
1
got
million.
has been, yeah, I wish soon.
That'd be awesome. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that was about it. Yeah, so it's
Amazing.
just exciting new roles and something that is out of my wheelhouse, but like, digging into it and learning.
Cool, man. Well, congratulations on that once again.
Thank you.
Ryan, how about you, man? What's going on with your clients? You got some beefy ones.
I got a couple beefy ones. Yeah, so, for people that are listening that maybe don't know, most of my clients are involved in some capacity kind of within the bodybuilding realm. So I just recently had two clients compete. One did her first show back at the end of September. She was in the bikini division, true novice, and then open. So she came first in all three categories, some of which were as large as, I believe, 15 competitors. She came second in the overall. And then the client did the auto open a couple weeks ago, or I guess that would be, 2 weeks ago. And he did men's physique. He won the overall for that. So for those that don't know, the way bodybuilding shows work at the amateur level is you compete with your class. So in men's physique, it's categorized by height. So he competes against everybody within his height class. If you win your class, you compete against all the class winners, and the winner of that's the overall winner. So he not only won his class, but he won essentially the entire show for his division.
Cool.
What's really cool with him is that's his first show he's done in 5 years, and we spoke about sort of his journey, I guess, within bodybuilding. He actually used the show itself as an opportunity to fundraise for, I believe, like a friend of his, and he honestly did not care what the end result was. Like, he was the guy, he literally was buying a car in between the morning and the night show. That's how chill and laid back he was. And we had spoken about sort of how he felt about bodybuilding. I believe it was the day after the show, and he wasn't really sure if this was something he wanted to do. He kind of sort of fell in love with bodybuilding for a number of years, and his experience, prepping for the show and then the day itself, he had such a fun time that all he could think about was how much he wanted to be reinvested in the sport. So, the win is nice, but I think how he felt as a person for me is the bigger victory.
Yeah, that's really cool. It makes me think of even like when I did the marathon, or when I did earlier this spring, I did a 35K trail that we chatted about very briefly with Nick Shaw. And during it, I was just like, there were moments where I was like, fucking hate my life. Like, I don't want to do this. This is like a shitty run and a shitty hike. I don't want to do this ever again. And then I crossed the finish line. Within 20 seconds, I was like,
totally worth it.
Wait to do another one, Yeah. And actually, on that note, just from a personal note, I registered last week for a 51K ultra trail. Barf. In Switzerland. But I mean, like, when in Rome, right? Except in this case, Rome is Switzerland. And the thing they do in Switzerland is they climb mountains and stuff. So I signed up for a 51K trail race that goes through, there's like the Bernese Oberland region. There's a really well-known mountain called the Eiger. And it's actually the mountain that the North Face logo is based off of. And so there's this pretty significant journey that'll be going on in July of next year. So, anywho, maybe think about that a little bit with your client.
This may come as a surprise. I'm not even sure I like driving 51 kilometers. So,
yeah,
long cardio is its own challenge. Like I got back into triathlons last summer. And like the difference between a 40-minute run and an hour 20 run is big. Like, just like getting yourself in that headspace of just like, okay, I'm running for over an hour right now, or like biking for 2 hours or whatever it might be. Yeah, it's a mindset.
Yeah, it's a totally different place.
Yeah, I always talk about, and I think, especially because it's very outside my wheelhouse, I have the utmost respect for people who are endurance athletes and the ultra endurance athletes. It's a level of discomfort, sustained discomfort, that I think is really hard to conceptualize until you're there. Yeah. A big thing for me, like I do a lot of my steps, I have a loop that's near my house, or I've got like a walking treadmill at home. I literally have like an anxiety like feeling about if I go somewhere too far. Like if I get to a point where like my feet hurt and my knees hurt, I can walk back. Like I have to endure at least that half back to where I was from. So the thought that you would do that willingly and then of that distance is kind of remarkable to me.
Dude, but it's crazy though, because I find that stuff for like, I would much rather do that than sign up for a bodybuilding show. I think truly, I think that for me, there's something about it that perhaps that there's a known finish line. It's more finite, and so it provides a little bit of more kind of shorter term. It provides the context for the suffering, and because it's like more short term, it's at least in the context of what I'll be doing, it's like it's what's the cutoff time? The cutoff time is like 10 hours. So. Or 12. So like it can't be more than 12. It can't. And whereas, the idea of dieting for, I don't know, let's say 6 months at a time or something, like I would much rather sign up for something that in the short term would probably hurt more, but wouldn't chip away at me as much over weeks and months. So I think like to each their own, man. And like I find, like I said, I have a ton of respect for what you do. Even like when we've taught courses together, like in Edmonton the last time around, like how consistent you were with your nutrition and just like how measured everything was and how your life revolves so entirely around your sport and your passion, I was like, fuck, that's impressive. And I think that like if a lot of people saw what went into it, they wouldn't actually want to do it. Like a lot of people want the end result and they have no idea the sacrifices and the life reorg that's required, you know, to be successable.
What's that quote? Something... Everybody wants to be a bodybuilder. Nobody wants to live no heavy ass weight.
That's right. Yeah. You have to say it more nasally though, I think. Good old Ronnie.
Well, that's something I made a post about this really recently, especially because I've made a few posts in the past where there's kind of this balance point, I think, with bodybuilding, where there's a category of person that thinks that you need to live like devoid of joy. Like you just eat plain chicken and you never eat at a restaurant. And I don't think that that's necessary, nor do I actually think that that's going to be the thing that drives long-term results. Because I think sustainability depends on enjoyment. But with that being said, I made a post where I said, you know, I've talked about that and the enjoyment piece and spend time with your loved ones, eat foods that you like. There are still behaviors that are conducive to success within bodybuilding, if that's something you care about. And much of the enjoyment has to come from that process. So somebody else might look at, and I've had people make comments where they're like you look ahead on the restaurant menu and you just order like the steak and potatoes. Like, why don't you get something fun? I enjoy that. Like, I like that meal. And it's fun for me to know that each of the steps that I'm doing every single day contributes to the process that's going to make me successful. And if it wasn't fun, I wouldn't do it. Like, I'm not doing this in a way that feels like I'm sacrificing fulfillment.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important concept, because I also think it's not for everybody. So similar, like, you know, I recognize that endurance sports aren't for me. I don't find that fun.
And by endurance sports, you mean walking the 3 kilometers from the Airbnb to the gym, right?
Oh, yeah. That was a bad experience. I'll tell
we'll
that.
We'll circle back to that later.
But yeah, like, so my point being, like, this is something that I really enjoy. And I've talked about when I don't find enjoyment in this process anymore, I'll stop.
Yeah.
You know, and I recognize myself. So I actually come from both myself and like my family from like an endurance sport background. Yeah. My mom especially is a really high level runner, or was a really high level runner. That's actually naturally more what my build like was when I was younger, quite slim. You know, I could run a 5K in 17, 18 minutes when I was like 14. And I hated it. Hated it. So even when I was good at it and I had a build for it, I did not enjoy that type of activity. So I just was never going to stick with it, and I was never going to be good at it to kind of like an elite level, because I just never enjoyed the process. The irony is I probably have worse genetics for bodybuilding, but I like love the level of meticulousness. I love the training. I love the dieting. So it's very easy for me to stay committed to the process because it's something I enjoy.
Do you think you were drawn to it a little bit because it's a challenge and because it's difficult
100%.
for you? Yeah. I kind of feel the same way. Like I don't have the body for an endurance athlete, and it was the first thing I was drawn to in my kind of athletic, journey was like long distance, and it's like I'm like 6'4" and 220, like not built like a runner.
Primed for endurance. When's your next event? I think if I remember correctly, you're doing one this coming summer.
You talking to me, Brett?
Yeah. I mean, both, but we'll go Brett first.
I would like to do a triathlon, just one in the summer, probably late summer, Olympic distance, so I'm not doing like, Ironmans or half irons or anything like that. That's a little bit much for me. Like 2.5 hours for an Olympic length, that's good.
Cool. And Rye, how about you, man? When's your next comp?
So probably not till summer of 2026. So I've competed each of the last 2 years.
Big off season. Yeah,
and this is something where, I'm going to use this as a segue into just talk about coaching in my realm. Something I talk about a lot is like needs analysis. And then from that needs analysis, you need to determine a timeline. So I had a similar conversation, my client Eric that just competed. We had discussed sort of what his upcoming show plans happen to be. There was one show he wanted to do, one I thought was better for him, and there was a 3-month difference. I was like, look, conditioning was not a problem for you. You need more size. And that takes time. If it was strictly conditioning, so, Shannon's a figure competitor at the national level, probably has more than enough muscle at this point to be highly competitive. Her issue is often just conditioning. So she could basically just compete every year until she nails that look, and maybe the timing works out because you don't know who's going to show up. In my case, I kind of estimated probably needed roughly 15 to 20 pounds of additional stage weight to be competitive to the level that I wanted to be. And I can't do that in 6 or 7 months. So it'll essentially work out that I'll have about an 18-month off season by the time I start my next prep. And then just based on sort of previous data, I put about, I guesstimate 12 to 13 pounds or so from last year to this year. And that was with about a 6-month off season. So another 15-ish, I think, is reasonable in a longer time frame, taking into account the fact that, the bigger you get, things can slow down. But yeah, so to make a very long story short, the idea was taking additional time away. And I think this is a lesson a lot of people can learn in the bodybuilding space in particular. People get very addicted to getting on stage because there's a lot of attention. You get all the comments on Instagram and people tell you you're doing a great job. You get all the really cool pictures. You've got this body that looks very marketable. It can be very easy to get caught in this trap of constantly essentially being in stage condition and getting on stage a lot. The problem is that's also not an environment that's conducive to putting on a lot of muscle. And depending on where you're at personally and what category you're in, you might need to take an extended period of time away from stage. So in my case, even though I was 227 on stage, and that's probably, I don't know exactly, but let's say around 5%-ish body fat. I'm not a small individual, and I'm still probably 15 pounds too small. So the only way to make up that difference is to actually spend time in an environment that's conducive to muscle growth.
If you don't mind me asking, what sort of body weight percentage about do you carry when you are trying to build muscle?
Yeah, good question.
I find for myself, my settling point seems to be around about 15. Again, a lot of this is a guess. Outside of maybe getting a DEXA scan, and even a DEXA scan has some error. I don't entirely know. My rule of thumb, which I have certainly broken in the past, but my rule of thumb is generally so long as I still have an outline of abs, some lines in my quads, like that, my body composition needs to be good enough. Some people, and this is another interesting thing that I think is just entirely genetic, people have different body fat or body composition levels where their best training happens.
Yeah.
My client Eric is shredded all year round. And legitimately, I have, he was on stage at 180 pounds. I was on stage at 227. So I've got almost 50 pounds of muscle on him. And he eats more than me. It's crazy. He is just shredded all the time. Very hyperactive guy.
That's really surprising to me. I wouldn't have expected that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Whereas for myself, I just don't feel great that lean. So in the 10 to 15% is when things start to get better for me. A lot of that is related to sleep, general energy levels. If I get higher than that, I'm sluggish, digestion's not very good. So the sweet spot for me is low teens-ish, body fat wise. If it starts to get higher than that, I'll, have some kind of strategic, diet period in to pull body fat back down and then ramp back up again. But that's something that's very individual.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting how that also applies even in the endurance realm as well. And, it's a theme that myself, and I know Brett as well, keep bringing up just because it's present in our lives right now. But, I've been consuming just a lot more content from like various performance coaches that specialize in endurance, and they very often, like a common theme or misconception that a lot of these coaches will address at some point is like the misconception of like the benefit of getting leaner as an endurance athlete, where like at a certain point, there's a tipping point where like the efficiency gains that you get from being lighter are less than the degree to which your performance is compromised by being at a lower body weight percentage. And a lot of these coaches will often recommend that their athletes be heavier than what the athlete would perhaps like from perhaps an aesthetic perspective. And I think it's probably driven largely by that. But they'll encourage them to be heavier, at a heavier body fat percentage, to carry more weight with them throughout this thing that they're doing, simply because like it's kind of like a Goldilocks zone of performance for them. And like I find that as well, like even myself, like generally a pretty lean guy, but there have been moments where my body weight has fluctuated for sure during the past year. And the places or the moments when my performance has been the best hasn't been when I've been at my leanest. Not even like, and like significantly. Like you can look at the data and you can notice like differences in pace, differences in heart rate. Like it's really, really interesting.
I would have thought like, obviously it's going to affect recovery if your body is like shunting resources away from tissue growth. But the fact that it's like on the day performance it's affecting, that's surprising to me. That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll even speak, as much as bodybuilding as an event is, aesthetic performance, it's very much a performance sport during the training.
Yeah,
and
totally.
Yeah, like, as somebody who's been very, very lean a handful of times now, and I'll say with the addition of a decent amount of performance enhancing drugs in place, your performance is really bad. Like it is distinct. There's a distinct change once you start bringing body fat up a little bit. Even, typically how people do this on the enhanced side of things is probably the smartest choice for most people post-show is as they bring food up, you probably bring drugs down as well for a variety of reasons. We can talk about it another time. So even though you have less drugs in place, the very fact that you have more food and probably more importantly, body fat is getting to a place where you're starting to regain normal physiological functions, like sleep gets improved. That's a really big one. Training performance goes up dramatically. And, a lot of people think pharmacology is this, silver bullet for a lot of things. And in some ways, obviously, it's very helpful. But it shows you just how profound those changes are when you get to body fat levels and food consumption levels that are just not sustainable.
Yeah.
Do you find that affects mental health of your clients? Like as the show leads up and they're like whittling themselves down, although they're looking better, do you find that like, the lack of performance starts to affect them?
It can. I think that this is where, with the caveat that N of one, this is where, as I kind of said at the beginning, like having appropriate timelines in place makes a really big difference. So especially for first-time competitors, especially for competitors who are natural, I like longer timelines where we take our time to get there, because you're not put in a position where you have to do anything really dramatic. You don't have to really pull food down hard. You don't have to do a tremendous amount of cardio, and therefore you're not imposing these extreme levels of stress upon them. So in a perfect world, like most people should be sustaining training performance probably up to at least 2 weeks before the show. It might, inevitably it'll kind of dip a little bit, but best case scenario, you should be able to maintain that training performance throughout. And then I think the other thing is just, communication with the client, telling them things to expect. Inevitably you will see a drop off. Inevitably you'll feel X way, just so it's not a surprise. And I think a lot of people, it's a weird headspace to be in that late in a show prep. And I think a lot of people will think that they're doing something wrong or something is going wrong. So explaining to them that these are very normal things that are going to happen. It's very predictable. I think just to kind of ease them a little bit.
Etienne, I don't know if you've ever gotten it like tapering your training for an event where it feels like because you're doing less, like you're not getting the same benefits. Like it feels like as the training tapers down leading up to an event, you're just like, well, I'm not running my like 20Ks anymore. Like I feel slow. Or like you know, whatever it might be, and then the event comes, and if you've tapered properly, your performance is like through the roof. But that lead up, I find sometimes gets to me mentally, and I gotta like stay focused on the goal.
Yeah, no doubt, man. Yeah, and like it happens. I would say it happens more to my clients than myself. I think what helps is kind of understanding the why behind like the how and the what, you know. And so I find like for me, I can kind of rationalize myself through it, I think, a little bit better because I've really integrated like the importance of a taper and I understand it. But a lot of my clients, they are either overtly or covertly resistant to it, you know? And I know there's a topic we wanted to talk about today, so we'll get to that in a moment. But just to kind of wrap this up, one thing that's really interesting in the taper phase is just how much people's like the sensitivity of the organism tends to actually skyrocket as well. And it's almost like a physical manifestation of anxiety. Like as people are in like the 10 days before, everything starts hurting. Like your knee will start hurting, like your knee, your foot, you'll start feeling old injuries and you'll get kind of like neurotic about like the you know, the discomfort in your outer, you know, like lateral knee or whatever. I had a client who had an event not long ago, and I was like, this is very likely to happen. Like, I don't know. It's like, but this is like a common trend. How it's going to manifest for you, I have no idea. And fortunately, she was prepared for that because she was like, my fucking body went nuts. Sense of self and one's identity. Conflating an idea that we have with like, I am this idea, you know, or like I am my intellectual stance on something, and some of the ramifications that can come from that, some which might be obvious in terms of, you know, individuals just being like resistant to learning, but also seemingly what might be somewhat like a less anticipated outcome of this type of intellectual tendency is throat punching Jeff Nippard.
I knew you were going there.
And so it's a very, of course, it's a relevant topic. Happened recently in our industry, and we felt like it deserved to be unpacked a little bit. And so for those that don't know what happened, Ryan is very up to date on the hot goss of the fitness industry. And so Ryan,
I'm just the most chronically online. That's all.
That's right, man. But for those that don't know, man, give us the gist of it.
Yeah. So I'd say based on what has been shown online, so there's always going to be things potentially that are under the surface that we don't see or may never see. But the two people, Mike Van Wyck and then Jeff Nippard, both train and for content and whatever else, Pure Muscle in Toronto. It seems like this kind of started with Mike made a post, which is very on brand with him, which is like that's talking shit about. So he was talking shit about science-based lifters and how they look mediocre, they lift mediocre, they're never impressive, even though they know all these things.
Right.
Jeff Nippard did a sort of response video where he said something along the lines of how Mike had said this thing. He laid out what his credentials were, which was that he was a pro natural bodybuilder. He had, I believe, like a national or a provincial record in like the bench and the squat, something along those lines, and then welcomed Mike to a debate if he wanted to discuss this further. From that, there was footage of, I guess, they both said something to each other, and then Mike hit him in the throat twice, pushed his cameraman, all of this went down. There's been a massive amount of dialogue about this topic online, sort of from all angles. And I know what we wanted to do potentially a little bit different is rather than just add additional commentary on who's right and who's wrong, is maybe talk about as you had said, kind of this identity around ideas. I don't know if you want to jump in from there.
Sure. I mean, the only thing that for me is just so hard to, I don't know. I find it so hard to relate to the type of anger that would be required to punch someone in the throat, so to speak. I mean, I don't think it was like a full, like, closed hand punch, but it was definitely a throat shove. Let's put it that way. Yeah. Like how you need to be feeling internally to get to a place to do that to another person, simply because there was perhaps a challenge to one of your ideas, which wasn't even, like, as someone who's relatively removed from, how would I say, like, my first exposure to what was happening between Mike and Jeff was essentially this altercation. Prior to that, I had never really seen or heard of any, like, direct, because I follow Jeff and, I'm relatively up to speed with what he does, but I'd never seen anything that would, in my mind, warrant like a physical altercation. Because in my mind, it always seemed somewhat respectful, like kind of like agree to disagree type of stuff. So the thing for me that was just really surprising was just like, I just don't get it. Like, I have no idea how someone got that wound up from Jeff's response. And then the other thing that I think maybe plays into this is that I don't know, I find like I'm just kind of interested in getting better. Like, the reason why I'm in the fitness industry, at least in part, and like actually let me back up. A huge reason why I love the fitness industry is because there's so much to learn, and it's a relatively young industry, just budding with information and insight and developments, and reconciling things that have worked anecdotally for years with new data, and sometimes the data, like, I don't know, the data will disagree with itself, and I find that interesting. And so getting to a place where one is so, I don't know if offended is the right word, or angry by that, is just really hard to comprehend, especially from the outside. So those are my thoughts. How about you guys?
Yeah, something I was thinking too. So again, like, I'm gonna refrain from any commentary or feelings about Mike or Jeff. I think I believe we might have had an episode on your podcast a couple of years ago where we talked about logic, critical thinking, logical fallacies, that type of thing.
Right.
And you sort of alluded to this at the beginning of this segment, but I think learning to differentiate between self and opinions is really important.
Yeah.
So like, you have your own self and then you have your position on a topic, as opposed to I am my opinions. And I think the problem is, if people don't know how to discern between those two ideas, if you challenge an opinion that they might have, it feels like you're challenging their identity.
Yeah.
I still think the emotional outbursts and the physicality extreme, but you can start to see, to me, it's actually just a flaw in critical thinking. And, conversely, if you look at how Mike kind of approached his attack on science-based lifters, that as well is sort of not necessarily a strong man, but it is a disingenuous assertion that all science-based lifters are weak and skinny and whatever. But it's kind of like a version of an ad hominem attack.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, you're attacking these people for an idea that you don't like. So what it really seems like to me is one person had an inability to critically think with a lot of skill. And when somebody else who, to Jeff's credit, he's been a big contributor to sort of the science-based, evidence-based part of the fitness industry. So he's very good at articulating his ideas and being quite neutral on things. Mm-hmm. So he argued his position, quite clearly. And I think those two ideas kind of clashing, made one person hurt their feelings.
Right. How about you, Brett? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, definitely agree with that. And there's something that an activity that we did in the exercise mechanic internship. Check it out. It's a really cool program, by the way. Where we had, Etienne had us write down 3 things, the principles of health and fitness that we know, that we're like absolutely certain of. And before going on with the rest of the activity, write those down. And then the activity was now find some research online that disproves the thing you just said, which was really, really effective and really helps to like divorce yourself from like those ideas. And if I can share one of mine that I thought was really fun was like the one thing that I chose was muscles only pull. And
Right.
then I had to disprove it, which like seems like an impossible task. But then when I actually like went and looked at some studies, of course, as muscles shorten, their volume remains the same. So as they shorten, their cross-sectional area increases, and there is actually a compressive force. Muscles do push in like not like a longitudinal, but like a lateral or transverse plane. They
Totally.
push outwards, and I was able to prove the thing wrong, which was like a kind of eye-opening in a way that like, okay, my paradigm's shifted a little bit. I haven't totally
Cool.
disproven this thing, but there's like a lot of opportunity there, trying that yourself and, identify something that you're like so close with, some idea, and then try to disprove it as best you can. I really like that activity.
I appreciate you bringing that up, man. That's great.
This to me goes to the idea of skepticism, which should not be misconstrued as cynicism. And all skepticism really means is being able to look at any idea, any topic, and being able to be critical of it in a way that's productive. I think one of the best things that we can learn to do as human beings is be skeptical of our own beliefs that we hold.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I think you end up doing one of 2 things. You either find flaws in whatever your opinion is on something, and you can update it, an opinion that is closer to the truth, or you can have more confidence in the belief that you hold.
Absolutely.
But there's no downside being skeptical and almost like running an internal audit of your brain. There's no downside to doing that, other than you might be afraid that maybe you have a lot of opinions that are not based on a whole lot of logic.
Yeah, man, for sure. And oh man, where do I want to jump in here? I think that, like, to your point, Rye, the importance of first and foremost putting your own ideas on the chopping block for the sake of progress.
Yeah.
I think that like if you can learn to value progress and not necessarily the attainment of truth, but the pursuit of it. And I think that's an important distinction. It's one of the things we talk about in the internship as well, actually, just like, let's talk about like what mastery is for a moment. And of course, this is very much more so, I'm going to say my definition, but that like mastery itself is a lot like balance, in that people often view balance as being a state, but in the world, balance isn't a state. Balance is the name of a process. And you can think of it within the context of the human body, where like balancing is like the process of the center of mass moving a little bit, starting to move towards the edge of the base of support. Then you move a little bit, and then the center of mass will kind of come back towards the middle, and then it'll start to drift, and you notice it and you correct, and you notice and you correct. And that's the process of balancing, And I very much view mastery as being kind of like the pursuit of not necessarily truth, but it is like the journey of the approximation of truth, which is in many cases, I think, synonymous with the accumulation of further and further nuance. It's about going deeper into the gray, and in contrast to seeking the black and white. And like for me, like that's one of, like, if we're talking about a shift that the exercise mechanic course aims to nurture in students, like that's one of the big themes, right? That we address both directly and and indirectly. And because, yeah, like, the degree to which that you identify with your thoughts and beliefs is the degree to which that you will probably eventually get stuck, because pretty much everything is gray in some way, shape, or form.
The concept kind of reminds me of like a mathematical concept of like asymptotes. Like, you're approaching a line, but you're never actually reaching it. There is no like truth to reach. You're never going to touch that x-axis, but you're trying to get closer and closer. And as you know more, those steps are going to get smaller and smaller, and it's going to be a bit more minuscule. But like, we're getting there.
Absolutely.
Reminds me of there's a debater named Matt Dillahunty down somewhere in the States.
Sorry, Matt who?
Dillahunty, Dillahunty. So
Okay.
he actually was the host for like 15 years or so of a show called The Atheist Experience. So his background was, I believe he was studying to be, it may have actually been at one point, like a Southern Baptist priest, I might have the wrong terminology. And he questioned his own faith. I believe he actually went to school as well for theology, questioned his own belief, eventually sort of left the religion, and he actually debates with theologists now. That's like how he makes a living.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a concept, and I'm going to try my best to get as close to his definition here, but he talked about the difference between absolute truth and relative truth.
I like that.
You basically can't ever have absolute truth, because eventually you get to a point where, whatever governing logic you have to determine truth, whatever method you have, whatever like system you have, there's nothing to check that system or that philosophy against, that epistemology. But what you can do is, always understand that there is some room for error. And certain things, if you continue to think scientifically, so you're observing things, you're collecting data, you're running an experiment, and constantly running it through sound epistemology, you can have a lot of confidence in the data that you have that supports an idea that makes it appear as though an absolute truth. So for example, like, I know that gravity exists. There's probably a point where I can't prove that, but there is such a tremendous amount of data in support of that theory that I can be confident that it's probably as close to an absolute truth that exists.
So like,
this is like, sorry, I was like, this is one of those things where the discrepancy between these two ideas is semantics, but it's an interesting concept to think about.
yeah, totally. How do you, here's a question for you guys. How do you like maintain some sort of like conviction or like concrete values when you're constantly questioning those values and those thoughts and ideas? Is it something that's just constantly being reinforced when you question them? Or is there like some sort of like deeper,
Like during the whole week, but especially the 24 hours before? And I was just like, yeah, it is what it is, But yeah, I think some people even call it the taper crazies. Pretty sure that's a thing.
makes sense?
But yeah, so before we started recording, one of the things that we had talked about as being a potentially interesting topic to dive into together today is this unfortunate tendency in the fitness industry to conflate one's ideas with one's
Value system that you're like, this is what I have to hold on to no matter what.
Well, if you don't mind, I'll shoot on that first, which was, I think for me, I got really lucky in the beginning of my career where one of my mentors, and I mentioned this, I think, on our first team episode, where one of my first mentors told me that, like, if you're uncomfortable with nuance, you're in the wrong profession. And quite literally, if you're seeking black and white, like, just leave, And like I said before, I really looked up to him. So for me, that was a very formative moment. I integrated that. And I think that there's two things that sometimes people, a lot of my students will view as being mutually exclusive. And those two things, the two that I have in mind, are confidence and nuance. I think a lot of people conflate nuance with insecurity. And I really don't think that that's true. Like, I think that you can really confidently say to Kathy that you're working with, like, hey, like, it's like, and let's say, because for instance, a lot of clients or patients will come in like hoping that you have the answer to help them. And there's two ways to deliver like the nuanced quote unquote truth of the circumstance. One is to say like, I don't know, with your tail between your legs. And the other is to say like, you know what? Like, it absolutely depends on all of these variables. This is what we currently believe to be true. And this is how we're going to be working through this process. And I think that, how would I say, like, I think one of the things that really informs the confidence that's required to hold a nuanced stance is to be a lifelong learner, like to just be really, committed to the process of putting your ideas on the chopping block, constantly learning, being open to questioning. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's initially where my mind went.
Yeah, and I would agree with every single thing that you said, ET. And in addition, I would say my identity isn't rooted in whether I'm right on a topic or not. My identity is more closely tied to my willingness to learn. So again, I think that I was privileged to have more of an academic background in science. So there's always this investigative mind, I suppose, that you have. So I care more about, and I understand the fact, we talked about this as a really young industry, and there is constantly new research coming out. There's new data. I know that I don't have all of the available information.
Yeah.
And my job is to continue to update my stance as information comes to me. And that's kind of the way that I look at it. So my confidence is in my ability to disseminate that information and have knowledge that I can communicate with clients. Like, that's the thing that I have confidence in, is that I can take in all that information, understand it, be able to contextualize it, and communicate it to somebody in a way that makes sense. That confidence doesn't mean that I feel like I have the guidebook right now that I'm going to hold on to tightly, and that's what I'm selling people. Totally. I always this is something I talk about, I guess, as an alternative to people pitch sales for training. I don't think you're selling people a program. I don't think you're selling people a diet plan or whatever. I always tell people, like, what you're buying is you're buying my ability to critically think through things and problem solve as problems arise. So the thing that I have to offer my clients is my ability to think on the fly, learn something, integrate it in a way that makes sense for them.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, you mentioned like when you're presented with new evidence in a way, I'll paraphrase what you said, like presented with new evidence that you will like examine it. And I think at that point you were kind of talking perhaps a little bit more about like literature and data. But like another way that we are presented with new information is with outright confrontation, right? And like someone who, to kind of bring it back to what we were, this intervention or this moment of conflict between Jeff and Matt. What's his name?
Mike.
Matt, yeah. Mike. Where like that actually could have been a really great opportunity for both of them to be like, great, let's figure it out. Let's hash it out. Let's mash our ideas together and see what comes of it. And had that happened, they would have both been better for it, but you need to have something in common with the person that you're, debating with. There needs to be a willingness to not like prove the other person wrong, but there needs to be, I think, the intention to open the subject. Like, I think that like you need to, like, at least in my mind, the goal of a debate is to smash your ideas together to see what comes of it, not to prove the other person wrong. Like, it's the game of presenting, how would I say, strategic arguments with the aim of opening and deepening your understanding of a given topic. And I think that framing it in that way, had that happened, that would have been like a really great moment for both of them, in contrast to, a nice little bruise around the neck.
It could have been an exercise in empathy, like trying to understand what the other person's point of view is, even if you don't understand, or even if you don't agree with it, try to like at least put yourself in their shoes for those 5 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
It makes
Totally.
me think of there's a phrase that I heard somewhat recently in regards to marketing. I think it's called limbic hijacking.
Yeah.
It's this idea of you have like a clickbait title, clickbait picture, whatever, and it gets people's attention, triggers something in their brain that they get interested in it. You have to just keep upping the ante, upping the ante, upping the ante over time until you get to a point where, in order to keep generating, views or attention from whatever your audience is, you are so far removed from anything that is like honest or authentic or productive. And I think that it can be a really appealing like method when you're trying to grow your business at the beginning, because you get a lot of attention very quickly. But keep coming up with the word nuance, but it's devoid of nuance. And I think the problem is you get a guy like Mike who, if you look at his platform, the entirety of his online persona is he just talks shit about stuff. He makes these really disparaging remarks about anyone, everyone. He had one, I don't want to go too far down this road, but he had one recently where he was talking about, one of the reasons why he loved his gym that he trained at is real men trained there, not a bunch of gays. And I was like, great. Like, so that's a type of commentary he has about everything. And then you're presented with an opportunity to be the opposite of that person that you branded yourself as. And you're like stuck in this position of, do you uphold this image that you've created online that's made you a lot of money by being Mr. Tough Guy, take note, get whatever? Or do you, like an empathetic person, have a really nice, honest conversation? So I think people get caught in this position where they've created this persona online that they have to upkeep that's really extreme. And the problem is that type of person, that cultivated personality, is one that's incongruent with having civil discourse.
Yes. Great.
Good point.
Yeah.
No, that's great, man. So gentlemen, we're going to have to wrap. Any final thoughts before we close? Brett, anything on your mind?
Yeah, I was really hoping we were going to get a chance to do a form check on that throat push. Is he activating his lat? Are we doing scapular traction? We'll get to it next time.
I'm pretty sure it was all scap elevation and protraction for sure. Yeah, that's funny. Ryan, how about you, man? Any final notes?
Compression.
That's right.
That's it.
All right, cool. Only thing I'll say is, cool fun fact about the body: the only free-floating body bone in the body is the hyoid bone in the neck, which Mr. Mike blasted into oblivion. I almost said he throat blasted Jeff, and I just feel like then that definitely makes us gay, and we can't go to Mike's gym. On that note, gentlemen, thank you so much for hanging out with me this evening. I appreciate you both. I'll see you guys in Ottawa in a few days at the Hypertrophy Intensive. I'll talk to you guys soon.
Yeah.
Ciao, ciao.